Each of us are more than the worst mistake we've ever made. I think that Reverend Spencer's testimony lets us know that we were all one mistake away, and only one mistake away. Thank you to those who may just be coming in, joining us here at Unleash Mississippi. Thank you for those who stuck around to hear more great conversations around how we can remove barriers so that all Mississippians can flourish. My name is Stephen Randle. I am the Director for Work and Justice here at Empower Mississippi, and this is our Justice Reform panel. Now, joining me on the stage are three dynamic individuals who have amazing resumes, stellar personalities, and who bring a level of energy, dedication, and passion to the world of criminal justice reform. We have established, longtime attorney, successful attorney, who has a specialty in criminal law, who's seen this side of the justice system as a prosecutor and defense attorney, now sitting in the Mississippi House of Representatives and the chairman of the House Correction Committee. We have Chairman Kevin Horan. We have also joining us today, U.S. Army veteran, former mayor of Heidelberg, Mississippi, current Mississippi State Senator, and chairman of the Senate Corrections Committee, Senator Juan Barnett. And finally, we have former Chief Counsel on Crime and Terrorism for the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Utah, and currently and most recently named Executive Director for Right on Crime, Mr. Tolman. I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, again for the work that you do, the energy and the passion that you bring to the work that you do, and for joining us here today for this conversation. And without further ado, let's get this party started, shall we? Brett, I'll kick things off with you. Conservative groups like Right on Crime have been seen as national leaders and leaders in the advocacy space when it comes to justice reform. But traditionally, this subject has been something that's been more center-left leaning. Tell me why criminal justice reform is something that conservatives should care about and continue to care about going forward.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, first of all, and it's an honor to be on this panel. When they said no tie, that means jeans to me, so just want you to know, no less respect, just appreciation. There's no tie requirement here. You know, my father was in law enforcement, and I'll never forget a story he told me. He passed away in 2003. One of the last things he asked me to do, though, was to go to Washington, D.C. I was mulling over that decision, and it would forever shape and change my life. After that, I would become a federal prosecutor. I would serve as chief counsel in the United States Senate, and then President Bush asked me to be the U.S. attorney, and I did that for many years. But my father told me a story once where he was asked to go arrest an individual named Johnny Bugs outside of L.A., and he walked in, and he saw Johnny there, and he had broken a bottle in a bar and had yelled out and said, "You're not taking me, copper." And my father, he looked at him and he said, "Johnny, I think I'm your only friend in this whole room." And that was his response to him. And it kind of melted Johnny, and he sobbed, you know, and not every story ends that way, but I always remembered that as a kid. And before my father passed, he told me that he was very disappointed that the criminal justice system had not been able to be sort of fixed and repaired in many broken areas, and he got to see that during his career. I would never know that later I would be fighting to bring conservatives on board. And my message to conservatives now is put up or shut up. Do you want a government that is held and accountable for the power you give them, or do you not? Do you believe in your Christian values and your religious values, in the humanity and the worth of a soul, or do you not? For me, I'm very proud of the prosecutions that I had. I prosecuted, for example, the kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart. Very proud that he's in prison for the rest of his life, and that was an appropriate prosecution. But I'm also proud of the fact that I discovered an individual that I indicted wrongly that was innocent, and I wonder about the ones that I didn't discover. There's tremendous power, and I think conservatives should be leading the charge to amend and fix the broken aspects of the justice system in every state and across this great nation. The Constitution gives to us these due process protections, but you're not innocent. You're not presumed innocent when you're charged. And we've forgotten the great power. The rush to be tough on crime has pushed conservatives in a direction that they start to forget the groundings and the foundation of what they should be believing in, and that's the sanctity of the power that's given them and the salvation of a soul. And there are three things, just lastly, Stephen, there's three things written in the Department of Justice. The three goals or aims of a prosecutor. The first is punishment. The second is deterrence. No one ever remembers the third. And the third one is rehabilitation. But when I became a prosecutor, I was told, you're not a social worker, you just put bad guys in jail. And so my hope is we change that. And we start to change that dialogue, because conservatives, their underlying belief systems fit well to make sure that our criminal justice system is a system that works.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned how the system was set up, right? And you mentioned something that has been said a lot and has been shifted in the conversation, which is tough on crime. If we look at the United States right now, we are amongst the highest in the world in incarceration rates. And on a smaller scale and closer to home, Mississippi ranks second in incarceration rates in the United States. I guess my question to you, in your experience and historically, if you can speak to that, how did we get here? And what steps can we take to fix the problem, if it can be fixed through us?
Yeah, so I have looked closely historically, and I've lived through it the last 25 years, in the criminal justice system. And I will tell you that we've got we're out of balance on some things, and some big things. But I look at when Ronald Reagan was president. There were a couple thousand federal criminal statutes. Right now, there's over 300,000 criminal statutes and regulations with criminal penalties. An explosion, a legislative explosion of criminal laws. We arrest and we want to punish, and that has been sort of the mode we've been on in every state. And the over-incarceration problem, I'm here to tell you, is not based on data that supports we have an over-criminal problem, or that we have more crime, so we have to have more incarceration. What we did is created and expanded areas for prosecution, and then we enhanced and lengthened sentences. And we started to punish because we were mad at people, rather than based on a punishment that fits the crime. I had a judge, an incredible mentor of mine, and I was a brand new prosecutor. And he said to me, he's referred to, his last name was Benson, Judge Benson. He was referred to as Minimum Benson. And he was a conservative, but he kept sentencing people at the lowest end you could sentence people, all the time. And one time I said to him, why do you've let this reputation develop. He looked at me and said two things. One, people forget how damn long 2 years is in prison. And two, if I'm going to be judged by my Maker, it's not a bad thing to have erred on the side of mercy. And I loved his philosophy. It was so simple. But I came from a different background. I had law enforcement father, obviously, tough. He was tough, officer. And I had a sister who became a law enforcement. I had 4 older sisters. 3 of those were victims of horrific crime. 2 date raped by men that they knew. 1 kidnapped and raped in college. So I was young and impressionable, and I knew I was going to grow up and I was going to be a prosecutor. And I thought that the only thing you could do was to prosecute aggressively and to put people away for a long time. But I started to learn a lot about the error of that thinking, because one-size sentence does not fit, and our rush, and as Stephen outlined, this movement to incarcerate our way out of the drug problem, or incarcerate our way out of, poverty, incarcerate our way out of different systems, has failed. And what it's resulting in is enormous burden, both economic and human burden. Families are being devastated and torn apart, and cycles are continuing. So in Mississippi, you have an enormous problem, so much so that the Department of Justice right now in Washington, D.C. is discussing and looking at coming in and exercising their authority to try to rein in what's going on in some of these states. I'm here in Mississippi and have been for the last year or so working with Empower and great advocates, because I want to see you all fix this yourselves. And so that's sort of the history, and I think you're going to hear a lot more about what these gentlemen and others are doing to actually make it happen.
I think that's an awesome segue to swing to you, Chairman Barnett. Mississippi had a huge win this year with the signing of Senate Bill 2795, the Mississippi Earned Parole Eligibility Act. It's no secret that you, along with Chairman Horan and a handful of others, carried that load on your back for years before we were able to get it over the finish line. And I know that I'm not alone in being shocked hearing your personal story of the tragedy that struck your family with the loss of your father, and even more so baffled at how you were able to come on this side of things from that kind of experience. If you could, walk me through what that mental or emotional process of the level of forgiveness and understanding of redemptive spirits that it takes to actually now be a champion for criminal justice, and even more specifically, expanding parole eligibility.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and to my other colleagues that join me here today. Just glad to be here. And yes, you have, and others, Stephen, has heard my story, but it's not an easy one. It's not easy today. It wasn't easy yesterday, and I'm sure tomorrow is not going to be easy as well. As a matter of fact, my uncle who joined me here today, he and I had this same discussion while driving to Jackson today, and it was about my father. It was a 19-year-old individual who's over in Iraq, defending this country, and there I am in a communication van that I'm manning for my time to be working there, and I get this phone call on a Wednesday to say, Specialist Barnett, we're sorry that your father has passed away, and I'm answering the phone, and I'm saying, this just can't be, and they gave me his name and said, are you talking about Willie Barnett? Yes, sir. Are you sure it's not Willie B. Barnett? Because my grandfather's name was Willie, my great-grandfather's name was Willie, my dad's name was Willie, and so I just had to ask him, I said, what age of the individual are we talking about, to make sure that it was indeed my father. And when they told me that, it just really devastated me. And I managed to call home and ask Mom what happened, and she told me my father was murdered. And to fly home and being the oldest and bury my father and leave my mother and two brothers and a sister there to go back to finish what I had promised my dad that I would always do, and that's to finish my obligations. It was terrible. And to find out later on that the individual that had murdered my father did hardly any time in prison. I mean, in jail. It really bothered me. So much so that I was requested to be on jury duty, and most of us have been there. And the judge asked, who cannot serve on jury duty, and raise your hand. And I raised my hand, and they will sit over here. And after a while, they asked me why not, and I'm still so bitter because of what happened to my father. and nothing happened to this individual. I just told the judge how I felt. I said, Judge, I'm just going to be honest. It doesn't matter if they stole a pack of 25-cent chewing gum. I think that they should spend the rest of their lives in prison. Regardless of what they did, I think that they should spend the rest of their lives in prison. And it never got any better for me until I just had that sit down one day alone by myself. And it's like the good Lord told me. He said, Juan, if you expect to move from this place to this place, then you have to learn how to forgive. And when I started listening to what he had asked me to do, I could see myself moving from this place to this place. And as I began to move from this place to this place, I thought about all of those people whose lives I would have affected had I have served on a jury. How many people would I have sent to prison forever for a 25-cent pack of chewing gum? How many of those people's families would I have affected by not changing how I felt? I'm not saying that everyone is innocent. We know that. There are some that should be incarcerated for the rest of their lives. But there are also those individuals who I think need a second chance in life. And when I began to realize that the same individual that asks me to forgive is that same individual that wakes me up every morning and gives me a second chance on life, regardless of how I laid down the night before, good or bad, he still gives me that opportunity. And I just felt like it was him telling me then that in order for me to move from this place to this place, and this place that he was talking about was a place that I had no idea, but he landed me at or in the Senate in the state of Mississippi to serve on corrections and to now be the chairman of corrections. But I think it was important for everyone to hear my story, because there are other individuals out there as well that know that people can, and we often do, make mistakes. But there also should be some forgiveness and letting those individuals know that we believe in you. And hearing Dr. Nielsen a minute ago talk about the 5-year-old and the 5-year-old, I see those 5-year-olds and 5-year-olds when I'm out working my daily job with AT&T and I walk into a convenience store in 105-degree Mississippi heat, and I walk in to get a soda and a bag of chips, and I see the 5-year-old that has the capability of buying whatever they want to, and I see this other 5-year-old along with other 5 years old, and there's not $5 between the 5 of them. We know that there's a possibility that one of those is going to pick up something in that store without paying for it. Not because they chose to, but because of how they are in life. And one of these 5 individuals is going to be that individual that one day we should realize that this individual needs help. This individual doesn't need to only be incarcerated forever, but this individual needs help. This 5-year-old is now a 25-year-old that's facing another 25 years incarcerated. When do we help? Sure, I would like to be like this gentleman whose father gave him some good advice and told him what he would like to see before he passed away naturally. I didn't have that opportunity for my father to say, go to Jackson and do all of these great things. My children never had that opportunity for their granddaddy to tell them any of those things. But I just feel like that he may be resting in peace knowing that I found a way to make sure that some of those individuals, the least of these that we talk about, can get some type of help. And I was just proud to have individuals who fought with me, Chairman Horan and Chairman Bain, my Vice Chairman, Senator Sparks, Chairman Senator Bryce Wiggins, and we all worked together to make this happen. It was not a Democratic agenda, not a Republican agenda, but it was a thing that we all needed to do, especially in the state of Mississippi where they're saying that we can't work together. I think this bill did a lot of things that showed people that yes, we can, and yes, we did. And I would just like to see that we continue this, not just in Mississippi, but nationwide, and stop being mad with everybody. and think that everybody should be locked up forever. That's not the right approach. I think that if we forgive those individuals and let them know that we have forgiven them, that it makes them a better person, because some of those people in prison never had no one to believe in them at all in their lives. And now to know that, hey, somebody cares about me, somebody is trying to make sure that I do better than I did when I came in this place, I think that's what makes a difference. So thank you all for inviting me, and I'm sorry that I bored you all out there in the crowd with this, but let's just pray that going forward we continue to do some other things along criminal justice reform to try and help where we can and fix those things that need to be fixed. Because we have to realize, as Dr. Nielsen said earlier, maybe, we have some things that maybe need to be changed on the education side. Some in this room may say yes, some say no. We know that we need to change some things in criminal justice reform. Some here sitting here today may say yes, some say no. But as long as I think if we do what's right, I think the outcome will be better than what we have been getting in recent times. So thank you.
Thank you. In the spirit of talking about moving from one place to another and having advocates on every side, Brett, you also mentioned that you saw and you appreciated being able to see where you had made a mistake. And I think the admitting of that does a lot for a lot of people. Even the people that you weren't able to help or weren't able to realize will still benefit at some point. Chairman Horan, you have a very unique perspective as well. I'd love to hear how going from practitioner as a prosecutor and a defense attorney and now a policymaker, how has that shaped your view of criminal justice as it currently stands? And what, in your opinion, are those must-haves to start fixing this problem right now?
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate y'all having me here today. And to answer your last question would take a good bit of time to get to. There are no just pat answers to that question, but I will say, when I was a prosecutor, I began in a district with me and one other. I had me and a DA, part-time secretary, and 2 investigators. One was part-time. That district now has 6 assistant DAs, 3 investigators, 2 victim assistance coordinators. So back then, when you were prosecuting cases, you had a stack of files, and you just looked at the tools that you had available to you to see how am I going to move these files, and I had to figure out what I was going to do. So at the time I began, at 17 murder cases, and we tried 12 of them in 2 years. But people don't understand, like from the background I have when I talk to the legislators, that it's unique for someone to come in into a system where the tools that you have, like the habitual criminal statute, things of that nature, when you go to a prosecutor and you say you're going to take some of those tools away from them, they're very nervous about that. The habitual criminal statute, lowering maximum sentences, parole eligibility, things like that. And I understand when legislators hear from their prosecutors, we do not want these things. And I understand that. I didn't want them. I came down here and lobbied for the Prosecutors Association back when I was a prosecutor. And I never wanted to come down here and hear a legislature say, hey, look, we're going to get rid of, we're going to lower the maximum on possession of cocaine or sale of cocaine. I mean, I would be shaking in my boots if I heard that. You know, as a prosecutor, we're going to revisit the habitual criminal statute. So those things make prosecutors very nervous. When I tell legislators, hey, look, these are all my friends that I used to work with and I work against, for lack of a better word now. But you, as a policymaker, you have to set those relationships aside. It's almost like my 7 children, I can't let them come and tell me if they're gonna get up and go to school that morning, you know? I have got to kind of tell them they're going to school. And as prosecutors, they're all my friends, they can't come to the Capitol and say, hey, look, we've got to do this. And we have to be, as policymakers, look at the big picture. And I just, it was amazing to me. I have a brother that's an ex-prosecutor. My dad was a prosecutor. My grandfather was a lawyer. I have a niece that's an attorney in Atlanta. And I talk to some of the DAs now, and I will have conversations with them about, don't y'all agree from a financial standpoint, a common sense approach to this, we need to do this. And over a beer, they say, yeah. Get to the Capitol, it's a completely different conversation. And I understand that, but when I talk to members, we'll be talking about armed robbery, and I'll say, look, guys, when I quit prosecuting, it was a 10-year, no matter what your sentence was, you get eligibility after 10 years. And not when I quit, when I began, but when I quit, we eliminated some of the parole eligibility stuff. And I said, just call your DA and see if they want to go back to eligibility like it was in 1977 or whatever, 88 or whatever. And they come meet me in the hallway and say, under no circumstances do they want that. But now we go from a situation where back then, when I left, I think there was 11,000 inmates, and we're up to average 19.5 or whatever number you want to look at. So crime hasn't gone up that much. You hear more about crime because of Facebook and things of that nature, but the violent crime has not gone up that much. Well, the biggest thing we have, one of the biggest problems I think we have, is that we're playing games with ourselves if we don't do something about the mental health situation we have in our state. We're incarcerating a large number of people that have mental health issues as opposed to criminal conduct issues. And the second thing is equally as important that we have to address is our youth court system. And we're avoiding a big issue with some of the youthful offenders that need to be identified early on in their life, that they could be steered in a different direction. It takes money, there's no doubt about it, but those are things we have to do. The parole eligibility bill that we passed, we got resistance from certain fronts I couldn't believe we were getting them from. I mean, I had members that had sheriffs that would call them on the phone, help me get someone out, and I tell them they're not parole eligible. They can then not read the code section, And then they want people working in their communities. They want the supervisors want people working. They want access to workers in their community work programming. But I tried to explain to them, and policy is, MDOC does not have the financial resources to put those people out there if they don't have parole eligibility dates. And you're not being realistic about what outcomes you want without parole eligibility. I'll say it today, I've said it before. I can't begin to count the number of sex offenders that I put in prison. I can't imagine. If someone asked me to guess, I dare say in the thousands or close to 1,000. But without some type of programming, the sex offenders, majority of them are getting out in our community, but no one knows. If you give somebody 10 years for a sex crime, he does 10 years. There's absolutely nothing that the community knows about this individual when they get out. The neighbors don't know if he's been programmed within the system, and there's no programming. They know nothing about this individual. So those things, it's just some type of programming for sex offenders, I think, something we need to do, and it drives legislators crazy when I even mention it to them. Oh my God, my DA's gonna go crazy. I said, what about 2% or 5% parole eligibility? Something to give them some incentive to go through some programming while they're incarcerated. And those are things we're gonna have to do. We gotta take a hard look at what we wanna do in the poor state in the nation, the highest incarceration rate, and some of the code sections that we have the highest penalties for some crimes that are the least offensive to our society have extended periods of time. And if we don't revisit the habitual criminal statute, both of them, then we're not doing our citizens, notwithstanding what the prosecutors want. They're all, like I said, they're all friends of mine. They're going to say no to 90% of what we try to do down here, and I understand that. But we're still policymakers. That we're charged with the responsibility of looking out for protecting our citizens first of all, and then second of all, being good stewards for our financial resources in the state. And that's my introduction. I don't have any stories about myself, I can promise you, but I just think that we've got to be realistic. We passed parole eligibility. We have a very good parole board in place. I know they're excited about looking at some new faces on the screen there at the parole board, looking at some other opportunities to look at individuals that may be deserving of some type of consideration. But when we're looking at things that we've looked at in the past as far as extending these terms of incarceration, we're doing the citizens a disservice by not looking at parole as an option to programming these individuals that have got these sentences.
Absolutely. So I guess it's safe to say that we have a little bit of work to do ahead of us, correct?
We have a lot more work to do, and it's more, we're now, Chairman Barnett and I talked, and members of my committee, about looking at some reentry options. Everybody talks about reentry. We've been talking about reentry for 20 years in Mississippi. But since I've been in private practice and even when I was a prosecutor, but the opportunities, I think, present ourselves now with everybody on board and some of the resources that we have, that we can make a difference.
Absolutely. Now, Brett, from your experiences, when we talk about the work that we're looking at going forward, from your experience and also now from the vantage point of sitting atop Right on Crime, what are some things that what are some lessons, if you have, that Mississippi can learn from other conservative states or states in general who are doing it right, who are being smart on justice, who are being smart on crime, and who are using some evidence-based things as opposed to recreating the wheel, and just making it right? And what is that why to keep pushing towards reaching the bar?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that are being done in various states, and there's good and bad, obviously, in every state. But you look at a state like Texas, and nobody's gonna accuse Texas of being soft on crime. We know they still have some challenges, but how is it they've been able to reduce their incarceration rate so significantly that they've shut down or not built planned on prisons? 8 prisons they've basically shut down. That's not happening in states where they're not willing to take some risks. In Texas, what they did is they focused on, and I think you see these legislators, I'd love to have these guys in every state. I mean, they have experience, they have wisdom. What they're seeing is you can analyze a problem based on data. Take, for example, focusing on recidivism. If you look at and you incentivize incarcerated individuals, they'll lower their risk of recidivism if they think there's something else that they will receive except just length of time that they have ahead of them. So in Texas and in the First Step Act, which actually modeled, it was passed under President Trump, that modeled a portion from several states where it gave incentives, never before seen, incentives to individuals that were willing to take a risk, have some training, do some work, maybe some education. If they're willing to do those things, they could actually earn off of their sentence more time than was previously allowed under any existing law. So you can see that seems almost a no-brainer, right? But that fear that we're going to be soft on crime and it's going to translate into unsafe environments in our communities is the tension. So if we can start to use data to show, guess what? When a person gets out and you don't throw them back in prison because they missed a phone call with their probation officer, you've given them some incentive to continue to do what they're supposed to, or if you didn't hike up the fines so significantly that they just throw up their hands and they know any job they get, they're not going to be able to survive, and pay the fines and fees that they have. There's little things in this, front end, back end, and while they're incarcerated that can start to reduce recidivism. And I think when you heard the chairman say they're going to get out, keep in mind, 95% of all incarcerated across this country are getting out. What shape do you want them in when they get out? And we've learned that so far what we've done has not been working in the majority of this country, because those that get out have such a high risk of recidivism. But once you start to see the problem, then you analyze the problem, and you can implement some of these policies. And there's plenty of states out there, Georgia, Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Tennessee, that are starting to see that, and they're passing. And these are conservative states. And I think, I think of Doug Collins, who frequently, former representative from Georgia, who frequently would say, it seems like the conservatives come for the money savings, but then what keeps them around? And it's the souls. They start to see the redemption that occurs, and they start to see communities heal, and they start to see a total difference in their state. And so I hope that's what we start to see. And you guys are doing that. And I'm gonna pledge that Right on Crime, our resources to you all to come in to assist and help to bring data and research that people can look at and say this is the right decision.
Absolutely. And Empower, we have, I know Grant mentioned earlier, we have created a comprehensive tool, the first of its kind, where we're actually analyzing and giving a grade to each of Mississippi's policies as it pertains to the justice space. Now, I think that it's going to be helpful, but I'd love to hear, and again, you already touched on it, but how do you all think something like a grading justice, by kind of being really in your face with, this is how we're doing X, Y, Z, and this lets us know that we have a ways to go, and maybe we can actually pinpoint some policies and some things that we can do going forward.
Good
one. I don't know how to really want to answer that one. It depends on who's doing the grading. It depends on what grade you want.
That's fair.
So I don't think that we should, if you want to grade individuals, that's fine. Because I think at the end of the day, what we do and how we do things up here should be known by those people that send us here to do, the good for the state of Mississippi. But on the criminal side, we listen to those arguments from the sheriffs, we listen to those arguments from our DAs and families of victims and those type of things. So I'm glad that you are doing it, but I also think that it should be done in a manner to where, everything is included before we make that grade on that individual. Because like I said, if it would have been me 20 years ago, I'd have got an F. And would have been glad to get it because of how I felt. And there may be some other legislatures that feel the same way, that maybe hadn't got to the point to where I am. But if we're going to be graded, then I just pray that it's graded fair and not graded just because we agreed or disagreed with how Empower feels about a particular subject that it is that we're grading legislatures on. So. But if it's a grade and it's going to be fair, then okay, I can live with that.
Understood. Let me stop for just a second. We're definitely not grading you individually.
You're talking about programs and
just the different programs and policies. I don't want it to be a situation where I have to, look out for myself outside.
I've had to study. I've had to study a little bit harder in the legislature the last 2 or 3 years. But as far as the policies that are implemented, I don't have a problem with that. I think that you're going to be surprised that some of the things that we passed in 2795 are going to be You know, we put in the legislation for those things to be looked at. It has a repealer in it, a 3-year repealer in it, so we can see whether or not some of the things that we did in that bill are being productive and working. But yeah, I don't have a problem as far as, you know, whether it be parole or reentry or programming through MDOC, things that we pass, we need to keep our finger on it to make sure it's working moving forward, whether it be workforce training or whatever. I think those are things that we need to do. You know, 10 years ago, you wouldn't dare have a company in Grenada, Mississippi hiring a convicted felon to come out. Now they're calling, you know, saying that, you know, we want skilled labor. We want to make sure they're skilled, and if they pass some of the things, the testing that we want as far as application process, we're going to hire them. So we got to look at things differently than we did 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. It's just not a situation where Mississippi can afford to keep acting the way we've been acting with criminal justice reform. I don't believe that we're going to be able to move forward with some of the things the education panel said if we don't look at our criminal justice system different and provide some opportunities for those that are coming out to fill some of the jobs that need to be filled.
Absolutely. I want to thank these gentlemen again for joining us here, taking this time out. And although this conversation had to end, there is still much to discuss in the realm of criminal justice reform. And you've heard about education and removing those barriers to create those successful learning opportunities for our children. You've just heard about the justice system and removing those barriers that will allow individuals who've made mistakes to have a second chance, a fair second chance, at not only building their lives, but their lives of their families, their communities, and ultimately our state. And now I'll get ready to turn it over to Mr. Connor Norris, who's getting ready to host a panel on work, another pillar of Empower Mississippi, on continuing to remove those barriers so that all Mississippians can thrive. Connor. Thank you.